Welcome back. In my previous video, I was waist deep in more plants than you can shake a shovel at. Since this is not going to be changing for a bit, rather than waste your time complaining and summarizing things nobody cares about, I'm going to instead tell you a fun fact. Because of how it's constructed, a real-life version of the spade that I'm using right now would weigh roughly the same amount as a moderately sized backhoe. Once again, New Horizons really is putting the heavy part in heavy industry. Anyway, I am still very much waiting on crops before I can do much of anything, so I need something to fill my time with. My recycling system is doing well, and is slowly accumulating useful material, but nothing super interesting has happened with it yet. The last super necessary thing I need from it is enough olivine to make a block, and we aren't quite there yet. I decide my next time-wasting task would be filtering through the villager breeder to see if anything interesting had showed up yet. For literally no reason at all, I also try and get samples of all of the forestry saplings. If nothing else, I will have a nice variety of trees to decorate my island with in the future. Because if there's one thing I'm known for, it's my supreme sense of decorative style. This is very quickly morphing into me buying anything I feel like from the villagers, and that change has some logical consequences. To say I come back rich in new resources would be an overstatement. I do, however, learn some fun new things about forestry villagers. Turns out, they only have 3 trades. They get 1 trade for a proven grafter, 1 trade for any of the forestry plank options, and 1 trade for any of the forestry sapling options. That's it. The useful takeaway here, which should be something that I was interested in knowing if I were to do this run again, is that if you do get a forestry villager and they don't have the trade you want, keep trading with them, because it seems like you are guaranteed to get a sapling by the 3rd trade if the first 2 are busts, provided that they don't soft lock themselves. Interestingly, this also means I got fantastically unlucky with my forestry villager when I was starting out, which seems fairly par for the course. I also crashed my game. Again. By throwing railcraft tracks into the void. You would think I'd learned my lesson the first time, but nope. Some more micromanagement sees my Garnigia replicating at a truly excellent speed. Rather than worry all that much about being efficient, I'm just going to invest all of the red garnet I have into more blocks for growing more garnet. I need 48 red garnet dust for the 3 manganese to proceed, and there really isn't going to be that much of a rush. After mostly filling out a 9x9 of either grown Garnidia or spots where it can be crossbred to, I move all my garnet blocks to a corner that's already filled with plants and start harvesting what I don't need for crossbreeding. My bottleneck now is and will continue to be my supply of garnet blocks to expand production. A little under 3 dusts is not a very inspiring first harvest, but it's early days yet. Also doing well is my Sephirum plot. It's about half full at this point, and I am slowly phasing out all of the non-Sephirum plants in it. I have no idea if I will need Sapphire later on or not, but I figure it can't hurt to get some. On a pure lark, I also decided to just grow a bunch of tomatoes. If nothing else, they are used in one of the more early game accessible options to remove permanent warp, which is in and of itself something of a malapropism in this mod pack, seeing as it is hardly permanent at all. Auto-harvesting will be done with a crop harvester plugged into the biofuel line. I also decided to go ahead and stick a crop matron in. I'm not exactly certain how much unoptimized crops will benefit from having full hydration and fertilization, but I figure it's probably enough of a difference to be worth sacrificing the 1 seed of growing capacity to put it in. Truthfully, this is like the most effort I have ever bothered to put into industrial craft crop farming ever, so a lot of these mechanics are entirely new to me. This is not helped by the fact that I cannot make a tricorder, but mostly I just have basically no idea what I'm doing. The matron is using up fertilizer and water though, so I guess it's working? Also, for those wondering, I do want to upgrade industrial craft loot bags. One of the options for drops is a small sodium battery, which would give me an early sample of battery alloy that I could duplicate and extract antimony from. Unfortunately, some genius decided that their upgrade material should be an entire LV scanner, so that process will probably not be a priority. There are other ways of getting antimony. Since I keep running out of planks, I decide to automate their production. A macerator feeding into an assembling machine will quite happily run on 1 amp of LV power and work away in the background. It's simple, scalable, asks zero uncomfortable questions, and I just need to remember to resupply the glue every once in a while. As I am once again playing the waiting game, I decide to do some more base renovation work. Seeing as I am now vertically enabled, there is no reason to keep the stairway to heaven, so I remove it. The villager breeder can stay for now, because I still do want a few new villagers to get my forestry and Pam's Harvestcraft sapling trades done. The Thaumic Slime Factory meets a similar fate. There is actually a world where I decide to keep one of these things around in case I ever need a bunch of infernal drops or Vidium essence, but I would want to upgrade it and make it again properly, so it's time to say goodbye. It turns out that lava will tend to spawn lava monsters. What a surprise. To eliminate the risk of this happening again, I just put a block over the Cobble Farm's lava block. They don't drop anything I care about, which is kind of a shame because that might make for an interesting mob farm at a future date. Absent anything else to do, let's get the pyrolyse oven going. Pyrolization, which is a fancy word for making hot, lets me process wood into a bunch of useful resources. At long last, my garnet farm has produced enough material to create manganese. Truthfully, I could have done this a lot earlier, but I prioritized upscaling my production rather than rushing for it, and right now I am bottlenecking on my ability to make explosives, more so than I am on raw garnet. Either way, I have manganese now, which means I also have stainless steel. Batteries are the last thing I need to make a tricorder, so I do that. In addition to providing useful diagnostic information on all sorts of random things, it also is useful in telling me how polluted my island is. It's a lot. Or, well, it would tell me that if I could charge it. Finally, at long last, stainless steel. This really doesn't change all that much right now. I'm going to need way more before I can really get my systems upgraded, but it is a solid step in the right direction. Also, finally, at long last, I have all the parts for my pyrolyse oven and can start construction. I've decided to just add on to the existing stink ball, and we'll put it next to my implosion compressor, because clearly the pollution wasn't bad enough as is, right? Get that put together, and in short order, after a little bit of duct tape and some piping, it then runs perfectly. It runs perfectly. Right up, forgot the configuration circuit, there we go. I will admit, I don't really quite know what I want to do with this thing yet. I could rotate into a benzene power system super easily, because gas turbines and combustion engines are basically the same thing and rely on the same pipe logistics. But I don't see an immediate need to do that yet. The only problem I've had with my current system is the amount of pollution it generates, and that is easily solved by not going in the stinky areas. I do know, however, that I want it running as much as possible, so I claim my complimentary Natura Redwood saplings from the questbook and start stocking it up with pure server TPS and the tiers of disaffected admins. Still waiting on stainless steel, so it's time to do something different again. How about some nether stars? The first step to this, of course, is cleaver making. Beheading is such a good quality of life thing, it is utterly insane. The second step is the portal, and all of the behind-the-scenes dimension editing woo-woo. I'm smart this time, and world edit the dimension before entering into it, so I don't have to fix the buggy mess that happens afterwards with portals appearing thousands of blocks away from where they should be. Looking at you, Twilight Forest. After that loads in, I slap down a box to catch drops and start smacking skeletons. 2 stacks of swan eggs nets me 66 skulls, 25 necrotic bones, which are a crafting material for a health upgrade, and an upgrade to my cleaver. I, of course, put more beheading on it. After throwing all of the junk into the void, I go ahead and go on home. My first stack of stainless steel gets converted into motors. They will get used up eventually, and it's not like they're ever going to get cheaper, so I may as well make them now. And finally, the garnet farm is done. I won't say this thing is fast, because frankly, even just calling it slow would be a generous overstatement, but it does keep up with my EBF in terms of stainless steel production, so it could be a whole lot worse. After a couple of hours of touching grass to let the stainless steel cook, and also let the pollution dissipate, I end up with enough material to start doing something interesting. The first step is, as always, setting up a machine shop for that electricity tier. HV machines have additional output slots compared to their LV and MV versions, and a substantially increased amount of recipes that they can make. This means that a lot of my tech is going to need to be upgraded, which in turn means I need a longer cable than MV. I decided to keep my combustion generation set up for now as well. There are better options I could make, including stuff like cetane boosted diesel, but that requires more materials and work than I feel like investing at the moment, and I can just make more regular diesel and live with the inconvenience. I want to properly upgrade my sword. The Kusanagi I have been using has been fantastic, but I can make better. Hold please. And now with that out of the way, lickbones. Lickbone shards are dropped by death tomes in the Twilight Forest. This mob is specific to the Lick Tower dungeons and will spawn nowhere else, meaning that like before with the sappers, I will need to locate a Lick Tower and build the farm within its confines before I will get any. Finding the location of one of these is easy. I haven't killed a Naga yet, so the anti-cheese force field will still be up and highlighting the borders of its spawning area, and I actually already ran across one when looking for my Hollow Hill. Making a farm out of it is less easy. Because of the anti-cheese force field, I won't be able to break blocks within the confines of the active spawning area, which is not the same thing as the glowy green bogus, by the way. I can place blocks just fine, so I can make the farm without any issues, but anything that I place after will be marginally more difficult to get rid of. I decided to just make a giant monster mosh pit with excessive amounts of spare materials and start slaughtering everything. Yes, I could make a farm, but why waste valuable blocks and time when I could just apply more DPS? My initial goal is to farm enough material for 8 whole lick bones. I don't know how many iterations of wand I will need to fully upgrade, but I don't expect to be able to blast through Vis caps as effectively now that I'm following a normal progression route. This will take a bit. There are a lot of mobs that can spawn in towers, and death tomes are one of many. It's also not helped by the fact that as part of the anti-cheese, I can only hit mobs in areas that they won't spawn in. Also not helping is all of the infernals blowing up the wooden parts of the farm. Creepers generally don't spawn here, thank goodness, but ghastly fireballs will break blocks every once in a while. Status update. Creepers do, in fact, generally spawn here. Time to make a new farm. My second farm attempt is made entirely out of obsidian, has a villager to hopefully try and bait the attention of the zombies out of the way, and is actually centered inside the correct spawning area and not hanging half out of it like the first one. Let's see how well that works out. Well, if you ignore creepers blowing holes in the farm, it works a fair bit better. They do that with my overworld mob farm too, so I expected that and brought repair material. The zombie baiter lures all of the zombies into the void perfectly, and that is fantastic. But it leaves behind a nasty concoction of infernal death tomes, infernal witches, angry skeletons, and random creepers. I end up just calling it quits after getting enough for 4 bones. I had some time to think about it, and this should be enough to get my gold-capped Greatwood Scepter, and I am tired of dealing with the farm blowing up, getting clogged with cobwebs, or just straight up crashing my game every time it decides to spawn a gravity creeper and then have the gravity creeper blow up from something. Grinding this thing has not been a fun time. Putting all of that stupidity behind me, I get to work on scepter crafting. It goes exactly how you would expect, and I end up with a very nice scepter at the end of it. Apparently, eating more arrows than a Mongolian pincushion has helped me come to my senses, because I decided to move my bee breeding operation to the middle of my base. I keep just forgetting to do these at all, and the end result of that is that I am progressing along bee breeding lines that would make a United States postal worker envious. With this new setup, I should, hopefully, be able to keep on top of them a little bit better. It even comes with a system to repair frames in a convenient and accessible location. What a concept, right? My next project is a clean room. This is necessary for pretty much all circuit production beyond this point in the game, and there is no reason to not get it out of the way now. It's expensive, but not unreasonably so, and I get the parts for it made in fairly short order. Installation is easy, and I will just use an elevator on the roof to get down into the system. Simply to improve my quality of life, I also upgrade my mufflers to HV. This will drop pollution output by 25% for any machine that uses them, and will hopefully be enough to keep my vase from turning into a pure smog hole. More bees mean I need more frames. Specifically, soul frames, because they're the only kind of frame I care about right now. It may not look it, but a fair bit of time has passed between now and my previous clip, and not a lot interesting has happened. I'm gearing up for my usual 2 stacks of tiered leveled circuits. This time it's EV, and in doing so I am running into a couple of automation shortages. One of these shortages is sulfuric acid, so I very quickly put together a system to at least somewhat alleviate the burden of manually creating it. It also plays past the cell rather than having to buffer itself, which means it won't break every once in a while like my biofuel system does. Other good news, pollution is dropping. Nice. Other news, I need blue alloy for my circuit project. Electrotine is a nether ore that obviously I can't get, but thankfully I can synthesize with electrum and redstone. It just requires a small mountain of silver. It's time to make my crucible very, very happy. And finally, after many, many hours of collection and pre-crafting, I can begin circuit assembly. After giving my circuit assembler a few hours of grass touching, I also end up with a couple of stacks of EV circuits. Fingers crossed that this will be enough. Spoilers, it probably won't be. To make titanium, I will need to upgrade my electric blast furnace coils. This takes Kanthal, which has to be cooled in a vacuum freezer. Conveniently, with the completion of my EV circuits, I can actually make one of those. It's amazing how convenient that is, isn't it? You all know the drill by now, and just like that, I have a vacuum freezer. This also presents something of a problem for us. Kanthal coil blocks don't have a shortcut recipe like cupronickel do that would let me make them with aluminosilicate wool. It is mica insulator foil or nothing with these things. Mica insulator foils need mica and asbestos. Mica is obtainable, if barely, by following a ridiculously long bee breeding line. Yucky. Asbestos is obtainable using blood magic meteor summoning rituals, but the power requirements for those rituals demand tools that need titanium to make, so there is no way of getting the raw materials directly at this tech level. This is bad news. In older runs of this pack, I got around this problem by assembling a cupronickel coil block with the wool, then disassembling it to get insulator foil. That has been patched in this version of the pack. There are certain unintended game mechanics that I could exploit to get samples of nearly any material in the game, and one of those materials can be converted into asbestos, but I considered them to be cheating, and as such they would be against the rules. And even if they weren't, they're so unbelievably slow that the bee breeding for mica would take less time than generating the asbestos I need. Mica insulator foil can also be produced with fluorophlogipipe plates. I will spare you the process, but they can be produced in a very, very inconvenient way with my current technology. The problem is that they need to be bent in an EV bender, which needs titanium to make. So, we need titanium to get stuff to make Canthal coils, which require titanium. Period. No way around it. But maybe we can get titanium another way. EBFs have a mechanic called overclocking. For every energy tier above MV that you supply power for, the effective heat capacity, read how hot the coils get, is raised by 100 degrees Kelvin. You can actually see this by scanning the control block of the EBF and looking for max energy income. 4 amps of LV is the same amount of power as 1 amp of MV. 8 hatches would then be 1 amp of HV, giving us a bonus of 100 degrees. Likewise, 2 MV hatches would be plus 100 for running at HV, and somehow, if we could fit 8 hatches, that would give us plus 200 from running on EV. We can only make MV energy hatches, but 8 of them would, in principle, be enough to overclock the EBF hot enough to smelt elementally pure titanium dust down into ingots. We actually have titanium dust from the recyclers, so this would be perfect. If you could fit that many energy hatches on an EBF, which you can't because you need input and output hatches, a maintenance hatch, the control block itself, and all that other junk. For this to work, we have to make a mega EBF. Materials-wise, it's basically identical to what goes into a regular EBF. Borosilicate glass is uncraftable right now, but I can just switch out reinforced glass from industrial craft, and that has been makeable since the Steam Age. Problem solved. If you ignore the jaw-dropping material costs. And I will have to ignore them because there is simply no other way of getting titanium. Or is there? There is actually a titanium recipe my current EBF can process. If I could, somehow, get Galacticraft titanium shards, I could get titanium ingots using an LV tier EBF, no questions asked. Unfortunately, these shards are dropped from ores that are locked behind a great deal of space nonsense. If I want to go this route, I will have to resort to extremely stinky cheese. Recall my earlier thesis on the best way of locating cheese in this pack. You want to focus on technology that people don't regularly interact with, technology that isn't part of a traditional progression path, and technology that is usually considered underpowered or unrewarding in some way. Infused crops from Thaumic Tinkerer very much fit all 3 of these bills. They require a stupid amount of extremely warping research, they are never mentioned anywhere in the quest book, and their in-game documentation is such legendary S-tier dog water that I can only assume its lack was intentional on the part of the original mod author. Seriously, the entire reason for these things existing is summarized in 11 words. This is some beware of the leopard tier nonsense. They also crash your game. A lot. Breed the wrong kind of seed? Game crash. Break the right kind of seed the wrong way? Game crash. Break the right kind of seed the right way and get a bad roll on its drop table? Game crash, and I hope you have a backup or are a world edit ninja because your save file is now corrupted. Design a carefully automated system to ensure that bugged items are isolated and then accidentally look at the chest that they're contained in wearing holographic glasses? Hope you're ready for a bad trip because this stuff will do that. Oh, and if you try and manipulate the item, it will then crash you and corrupt your player state. So unrelated news, welcome to my new test world. If you're willing to overlook their glaring institutional issues and experiment with them anyway, these things can really be quite useful. Or you could just read the source code from the fork of the mod that New Horizons uses, which is what I did, because I don't feel like wasting time experimenting. You can pause and read through if you're interested in seeing the specific drops for each essence type. One thing I do want to draw your attention to, however, is that these seeds, whose add aspect loot function calls have a quoted bit of text as their item selector, yeah, they do something really special, because that little quoted bit of text tells the game this is precisely as busted as you think it is. and as such was mostly patched in the newer versions of the Modpack. Mostly. I would like to call your attention to the line of code describing what Precanto seeds can drop. I wonder what items have the word shard in their name. Drum roll, please. Oh, for crying out, just forget it. NEI search for hashtag shard, and most of them will come up. The things drop titanium shards, alright? They drop shards, and given the truly phenomenal number of problems these things have caused for the dev team, and me personally, I can only conclude that this is an intentional mechanic at this point because they had plenty of chances to review the exact line of code that is doing this. So no, you don't need to make a mega EBF, you can just do this. But I am making a mega EBF anyway because I have standards, I hate working with infused seeds, and these things can go themselves. For all of my whining, a mega EBF is not only well within my ability to make, it isn't even that expensive. It's essentially just a giant ball of tin, copper, iron, nickel, and redstone, and I can make enormous amounts of all of those pretty much on demand. The only stumbling block is going to be the 5,000-ish ruby dust that I'm going to need for the aluminosilicate insulation, but ensuring an uninterrupted supply of redstone, that process should only take about 30 hours of centrifuging with 8 centrifuges running. This sounds terrible, and make no mistake, it absolutely is, but it's also pretty comparable to what I did to get into HV with my recycler setup, so I'll live with it. If it wasn't obvious, I cut out just a phenomenal amount of dead time when I make these videos. My centrifuges can just be directly hooked up to both the fuel line and a line supplying redstone from the mob farm. I make some modifications to the auto-crafting setup over there to increase the redstone output speed, and it should be more than enough to supply the centrifuges as long as the mobs keep coming. The whole thing consumes a little less than 1 amp of MV power, too, so there is a case to be made that I should just keep it running forever and use it to produce chrome once I'm done with the EBF, but I will revisit that another time. After that, it's mostly just a waiting game. Everything else will finish long before the coils will, so other than having that running in the background, it's pretty much business as usual. I am admittedly concerned by my titanium supply. It's somewhere in the realm of functionally non-existent, but I am already progressing towards a solution there in the form of breeding literally every bee in the known universe. It's just taking a while. In order to make aluminosilicate wool, I need some sort of quartz dust. I decided to go with Certus, because the crystals are extremely easy to replicate at the scale I will need them, and crank out a few thousand of those. I also get bored and go kill a few wither bosses. There are 2 ways of doing this. The safe, slow, and slightly inconvenient way, or the incredibly unsafe but very quick way. I will leave it up to you to determine which one I chose. For those who are wondering, the skulls that it shoots will despawn before they hit my base up high here, so I'm not gonna punch holes in my ceilings by doing this. And yes, I absolutely should have done this in the Nether to get the pride charts, but I forgot about it at the time and I don't really care. My next project is to complete what should hopefully be my final mob farm upgrade. To do this, I first have to create a new and more optimally enchanted diamond spike. The one I have in my old farm is decent, but it was created using random enchanted books, and as such is significantly weaker than it should be. Spikes cannot be enchanted using an osmotic enchanter, but they can accept enchantments from things like infusion enchanting and enchanted books. So, while this is a little more complicated than it really should have been, it does work out in the end. Spikes can also be over-enchanted, so I do that as well. While I'm in the area, I also hammer out a quick warding focus. This can be used to turn nearly any vanilla block into an indestructible and immovable building material. I'm certain you can see why I would be interested in that. My original farm design is going to crib off a lot of the old farm. The difference being that I have actual materials with which to create a proper design. Spoilers, the design changes quite a lot as I make the farm, so it is still very much something of an iterative process. Some things that I am certain to implement, however, are that I'm going to go from the half-square design to a full square. This effectively doubles the amount of mob spawning in the farm, and since I'm nowhere near the theoretical mob cap, should translate to a near-perfect doubling in its output speed. Yeah, it's time for fun trivia with Ducky. Warded blocks lag. A lot. Those suckers dropped my frame rate by like an entire order of magnitude when I can see their outlines. If you have to do bulk warding, I would strongly recommend using warded glass blocks to do whatever it is you're doing rather than rely on the focus. Even when I make a containment casing for the farm, the warded blocks don't update their light levels correctly and have to be manually dewarded and rewarded. It's a bit like playing Minesweeper, except laggy, and not fun. Designing a system that will let experience orbs and items down the loot chute, but not let mobs down the loot chute, and will also force spiders to climb into the spike is really annoying. The solution that I end up going with is a nice, nightmare-infused collection of microblocks that create what is effectively a 1 1/4 block wide chute with a fence post in the center to shove spiders up. Making this sucker is absolutely miserable. Around this time, I also decided I really should have made the farm 3 blocks tall instead of 2, because otherwise skeletons and zombies spawn in and clip into the ceiling and get stuck, and that reduces mob caps. The original reason I had this farm 2 blocks high was to prevent endermen, but that's no longer a concern because there's no water in the farm. So that was half an hour of my life that I'm never going to get back. You're also probably wondering at this point why I decided to make the farm out of the single most inconvenient material to work with when I could have made it out of literal dirt, warded it up, and it would have functioned exactly the same. I am also wondering that exact thing. All of my whining aside, when I finally get everything built up properly, the production rate of this sucker more than justifies the effort. If the previous farm was a waterfall of resources, this farm is a tsunami. I am very much looking forward to the nonsense I'm going to have to do to manage the items and experience flux from this bad boy, but that is going to be something that requires time I do not have in this episode. As always, thank you for your time. The YouTube buttons continue to be located in their usual positions if you find yourself inclined to justify their existence, and I hope you enjoyed.